Globalization and Social Movements for Global Justice. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to come together at a very important topic right at a very important time in history. I think there's so much change and flux is going on. There's so many power dynamics in the world, climate change, inequity growing, different kinds of class disparities. So I think it's a really important time for us to have this kind of topic, and also to have it as something that we're talking about across disciplines and across different kinds of societies, academic societies. And hopefully, this is a conversation that we're going to start up in the front of the room, but that all of you are going to continue at the tables and then kind of give us some ideas back. So.
Hey everybody. In the fall of 2013, the Social Justice Research Institute, which we call SJRI, was founded here at Brock University, and it's a very exciting institute. We're involved in really advancing transdisciplinary scholarship, particularly in the area of social justice, and also community outreach. And so far we've got 47 faculty members from 15 different departments and centers here at Brock University, all involved in this institute, as well as sort of gradually becoming more involved in community outreach as well. So it's a very exciting thing, and we've got lots of things that we've been connected with here at Brock over the course of Congress. On most of the tables, you'll find a leaflet that outlines some of the events that have yet to happen, and also a bookmark, and you can follow the link on the bookmark, and if you want to, you can actually join up as a participating member, and then we'll send you emails about events that are happening. And one of the things that we're also interested in, of course, is developing collaborations across disciplines, and that can certainly involve people who are not at Brock, as well as people who are at Brock. So I invite you to do that. I also would like to invite you to join us later on today at 5 o'clock in the beer tent for our social. Thank you very much.
So before I hand over the mic to our first panelist, I just want to also acknowledge the role that Conway has played in bringing together this panel. And so thank her for all the diligent work to kind of bring our various panelists together and to create the links between our societies and also to this SJRI. So let's just give her a round of applause. McMichael is a professor and is the chair of the Development Sociology Department at Cornell. And his current research is really looking at land grabs and resistance to land grabs. He's published widely and has a recent publication that's called Food Regimes and Agrarian Questions. And the subject of his presentation today is going to be looking at food sovereignty as a movement with agrarian origins in the Global South, but very much conditioned by North-South relations and the processes of urbanization. The struggle to protect and promote small producer rights is complicated by a Western settler model of industrial agriculture, which frames global UN debates. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for coming today, and thanks to Janet for driving the lawnmower away just in time. I've got 10 minutes, I believe, so I'm going to talk about food sovereignty fairly quickly. The first thing I want to sort of emphasize is that the concept of food sovereignty has become very elastic, as Canadians in particular well know, because there's been a flurry of publications on food sovereignty in Canada. The Food Sovereignty and Globalization and Food Sovereignty book that came out recently was a book that I had a chapter in, and I have a familiarity with what Canadians are thinking about. And one of the things that I wrote in that chapter was to try and emphasize or remind ourselves that the food sovereignty movement had agrarian origins. Its origins, as many of you know, came out of the agrarian crisis in the 1990s, when La Via Campesina began to organize in the early 90s to attempt to politicize the concept of food security that was being heralded by the the political and economic elites as the way to feed the world through the world market, with world granaries such as the US, Europe, Argentina, various other places, Australia, Canada, and transnational corporations would convey the food to populations that needed the food. So what La Via Campesina and its allies did was essentially came up with the idea of food sovereignty, the concept of food sovereignty, and in 1996 in Rome, they came to the FAO and they articulated that concept. And I think it's a very important concept strategically, because essentially what they were doing was not only problematizing and politicizing the question of food security, and pointing out that the global food system, as organized under the WTO trade rules, was dumping artificially cheapened foodstuffs in markets in the South in particular, and driving small farmers off the land, or at least driving them out of business, and so they were reverting to margins and subsistence farming. So essentially the argument was that this food security regime was actually creating food insecurity on the land. And the second point is that the concept of food security, food sovereignty, was, I think, a concept of strategic essentialism, because it was appealing to a conventional understanding of sovereignty. It was essentially saying that states, governments needed to rebuild their domestic food systems, their farm sectors, which had been let slide during the period of structural adjustment, and credit had been withdrawn and public subsidies to farmers and so on, so that the agrarian crisis was very much a political product, and the food sovereignty movement was very much a political response to that crisis. And of course the food sovereignty movement, La Via Campesina, and then the umbrella movement, the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty, that emerged as a general alliance, advocated for small producer rights and began actively working within the United Nations system, and have had quite a deal of success, which I'll talk about. The argument that the food sovereignty movement was making was essentially, for the South, land rights were important, land reform was important, and more recently land sovereignty, which I'll talk about. In the North, land access for small farmers struggling to get onto the land in the face of land concentration, fair prices, stable markets, community-supported agricultures, and all of the paraphernalia that go with local food systems. So there was a differentiation across North and South. And I think it's important to remember that Southern societies are mostly agrarian societies. They have farming cultures. They're concerned, the small producers are concerned with protecting seed banks, advocating seed exchanges, developing cooperative relations, stewarding the land, and as Hannah Whitman, a Canadian at UBC, argues, promoting the idea of agrarian citizenship, which of course is directly problematizing the concept of citizenship that conventional social science associates with urbanity. In the North, the urbanized societies, food sovereignty is seen as an urban initiative with food justice, public health prominent, and stable local farms and stable environments. Now, what's happened, I think, is that the concept of food sovereignty emerged from the agrarian South and is now inhabiting the urban North. And one of the issues, I think, is making connections between those two particular branches of the food sovereignty movement. The second issue is the North-South relations, and global supply chains, I think, in particular, have become an issue, and I'll talk about this in my later talk. But industrial crops now are dominating the landscape across the world, producing feed grains for livestock as people eat more meat, biofuels, plant-derived feedstocks, so that we can drink bottled water and feel good about protecting the earth. The global supply chains depend on cheap land, labour and water in the south, and of course industrial agriculture is busy offshoring because of the profitability of that, and also because of the decline in fertility of land in the north. So essentially southern resources are beginning to sustain northern lifestyles and accumulation patterns. One could argue that dependency is now reversed. And finally on this issue, the archipelago of northern local food systems that many of us are involved with, I think are very important, not just for local autonomy, but also for northern autonomy. In other words, to stop exploiting the South. And so this, I think, involves a reflexive politics of social justice. The third issue I want to mention is the land grab politics that are going on in the world right now. And I'm involved in the Committee on World Food Security through the civil society mechanism, which is essentially a grouping of social movements and NGOs who are concerned about advocacy for small producer rights. And these are movements of many kinds: fisherfolk, forest dwellers, indigenous peoples, small farmers, farm workers, migrant workers, etc. And what we're trying to do is to promote responsible regulation of investment in the Global South in particular. And this has come out of the land grab. When the land grab became prominent in 2008, the World Bank immediately, behind closed doors, established a set of principles for responsible agricultural investment, which essentially privileged private capital investment. The social movements within the FAO, the IPC for food sovereignty, pushed back and had the FAO reject those principles and come up now with their own principles for responsible agricultural investment, which are currently under debate and negotiation in the FAO. And I'm involved in that process in Rome. I've just been to Rome and I'll be going back in October when the big debate comes to a climax. But the thing I just want to mention here that picks up on Janet's questions is that in the Committee on World Food Security, what's interesting is that a lot of the framing of the language is by lumping. And a couple of examples is that investment is understood to be essentially standard across small and large scale agriculture. What we're trying to do is to argue that member states and private sector investors need to recognize that large-scale investment in input-output industrial agriculture systems is very different from the labor investment that smallholders put into their land, their resources, their soil fertility, maintaining water cycles, protecting seeds, protecting biodiversity, etc. So that's one issue. The other issue is that farmers are always presented, lumped together as entrepreneurs, and the assumption is that small-scale producers are entrepreneurs in waiting, and that's another struggle that we're trying to address. And essentially, I'm beginning to think of an argument about the three countries that are the most virulent against the social movements are Canada, Australia, where I'm from, and the United States, of course. They're all settler societies, right? And their conception of agriculture is very much derived from the history of settler agriculture, commercially oriented from the beginning, individual property rights, property systems, specialization of agriculture after World War II. All of those things, I think, are driving the assumption, the hegemonic assumption that there's only one kind of agriculture, small or large, it's all the same. And what we need to do is get investment to smallholders, bring them into value chains, and get them producing for export markets, which of course leads them to go into debt, lose their land, and this is another form of land grabbing. So essentially what we're trying to argue is that all of this language invisibilizes the process of farming the land as opposed to industrializing the land. It trivializes landed identities, and finally it's a great opportunity to introduce the idea of land sovereignty, which refers not just to food sovereignty, but also to access to the land as an identity issue, as well as a territorial security issue. So it's not just about healthy food, we need a stable land base, and so this is the kind of struggle that I'm involved in right now. Thank you.
So Katharine Rankin is Professor of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto. Her current research program examines post-conflict transition and state building in Nepal's agrarian districts. It extends the fundamental commitment to conjunctural analysis developed in her book, Cultural Politics of Markets, Economic Liberalization and Social Change in Nepal, with the aim of assessing progressive and regressive possibilities in the so-called post-conflict conjuncture. So her talk will take up the aims and aftermath of the people's movement, Yana Andolani, is that right? Yeah, sort of, yeah, in Nepal, with a focus on the Maoist ideology and party formations in post-revolution district-scale state building. Key themes it will address include peasant consciousness, development, and articulations with global political economies. Dr. Rankin.
Tell you're a Latin Americanist. Africanist. Okay, I also want to thank Janet for organizing this kind of unusual conference event with such a cool format. It's pretty exciting. And my comments, not surprisingly, come out of having been working in Nepal and wanting to share some insights about the recent 10-year civil war and its aftermath that I think could be helpful for thinking about what she's asked us to think about, which is building effective alliances for social justice, and along the way for thinking also about relationships among social movements, revolution, state building, and globalization.